Hello, I am Blue Fire Poker, and today 6 Mac attention to details. Detective Jiggy. What's up? DrGiggy on the computer for a 6 Max video of 2-4. It's been a while since I've been doing a 6 Max video. So there it is. I've been asked in the forums to do one. Wasn't even aware of the fact that it's been so long because I've been doing full ring and heads up and stuff like that. So there it is, back where it all started. 2-4, 3 tables plus a replayer, live poker, Jiggy on the Stars cash games, doing what he does best, hopefully, which is running good. The team. This is weird by RJ the Chimp. I am going to call basically just for info and because I think I am good from time to time. I was not good this time, but I'm not doing that call against anyone. This guy has been playing really special so far, as you can see from his stats. So at least I have some info now. The theme of this video is going to be the attention to details in a game, because I felt lately like I was asking myself what's the difference between a good, a great, a bad, and whatever regular, and one of the biggest differences is the attention to every single detail that you can put attention onto basically at a poker table. And I'll show you what kind of details you want to take into consideration when playing poker. So yeah, this is the theme of the video. I'm gonna be playing my tables, talking about the interesting hands as they happen, but I will try to plug in some notes that I've been taking on that attention to details thing. I'm gonna try and split all the details that I want to talk about during a poker hand into 2 categories. The first category is going to be the actual technical game, which is something people are much more familiar with, especially when they are trying to learn the game. What kind of boards to check raise, what kind of boards to attack, what kind of hand, what kind of equity you want to have when you attack people, what kind of taxes you want to attack people with, all these kind of stuff that happen during the course of a hand. I'll try to, as I talk, talk about and put some emphasis on those small details, those small things as much as possible. And the other part is the adjustments game, which I call playing the player. This is the part about acquiring information on your opponents and reacting according to that information. And we'll see how to acquire that information and what to do with that information. Couple of interesting hands that have happened so far in the session. In order to talk what I want to talk about, I'll show you these couple of hands. I've been playing for a while now, just because of the whole setup of the video. I need to have some kind of read against my opponent, obviously, so it makes more sense to talk about that. So I'll show you basically how to, like I said, acquire the information and how to logically get as many reads as possible on your opponents when you first sit at a table and you haven't ever seen them, and how it will affect your game plan moving on from player to player, basically. Here on table 2, I know Mastangino pretty well, and I know he is not going to calm me down with a lot of holdings if I 3-barrel, so here we go. I'm starting. So yeah, coming back on a couple of hands that I've played so far that are going to give me some info on my opponents, and a couple of hands that I want to show you what kind of information I want to get on my opponents when I play these hands. First, let's start, before I start with that, let's start with an introduction to what I'm saying, because like I said, this is the whole attention to details thing. This is definitely the difference between most good or great players. The more details you can take into account rightfully during a hand, the better you're going to be at poker, obviously. And I'm doing the video at mid stakes at 2-4 because pretty much every single player that is stuck at mid stakes trying to move up and not having the results that you would like to have either at, I don't know, another 100, 200, 400, whatever. It is going to one of the things that is going to keep people from advancing is that they don't factor in the good informations when they make their decisions. For most players, this mistake is going to show up as they play too much their own hand, and most players are going to have a good technical game. But I talked about earlier, just because of the way the game has been thought, I think most players are learning how to play certain hands on certain boards and that kind of stuff. But this is weird. I have to think about handometry. Yeah, the way the game has been taught, basically most cash game players at mid stakes anyway got there because they have a good technical game, but they lack the feeling of the other players, how to adapt, how to adjust to other players. Here on table 3, I already have a pretty good historics with this OMX, and I feel like shoving is the best play because I feel like it's going to show up with a draw more often than not, but I could be wrong here. And I feel like he's kind of committing himself with a good draw, but not quite, and that he's going to be put in a really weird situation because he doesn't expect me to shove here. And I don't expect him to continue his bluffs on the river if he's bluffing anyways. So I'd much rather just take down the pot because I don't feel like I have value of not slow playing, but playing it passively by calling and calling to take, which would be the standard line against most players, but I don't think it is against that player in that situation. So yeah, I feel like most players are lacking the playing the player part that I was talking about, and that's kind of what I want to teach you guys, what to look for when acquiring information on an opponent and how to react to that kind of information. So far what I've been playing against the guys that are there, just a second, I will put myself on some waiting lists. I'll just sit here instead of the other table. Alright, this is getting too short-ended for the video. I'm not back. Alright, don't check that, it's personal. Okay. So yeah, I think I've set it up already. So on to what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about it basically what you want to look at when you look at your opponents playing and what you can deduct from what they are doing and The ultimate goal of all this process of acquiring information and checking every detail of a hand is to discover your opponent's leaks and expose them later and use them to your advantage, basically. Um, you want to look at thinking patterns that you want to make deductions from certain spots against certain opponents uh, that will be useful later in similar spot, not exactly similar. What's the word for that? Not same spot basically, but similar spot that are gonna rise. What you want to do is you want to create a psychological profile of every opponent. This is kind of your goal, and from that, when you've built that kind of psychological profile of every opponent, you want to use it to your advantage, obviously. So a couple of hands I played. First one is going to be against Pass 72, which used to be Pass Le François, Red Pro Full Tilt. Good friend of mine, he knows how I play. I kind of know how he play. He watched me play. So we have, even though we haven't played that much against each other, we have some pretty good historics. And this hand, I chose this hand that I've played already because it does look kind of standard, but it is not. It is a mistake. This one is about a technical mistake that is going to add up in the long run. And this, I'm just going to show you past why it's a mistake, basically. I decide to check the flop. I raise small blind, he calls. I decide to check the flop, he bets. I decide to check all once because on this board, I don't think he's going to multi-barrel me a lot. And I think he's the type of guy to go on autopilot pretty often and just bet once because I check to him and then realize that it doesn't make much sense and then give up what he was doing. So I check call with the intention of basically check folding the turn, but I don't think he's barreling the turn with air pretty much ever. So check, and he ends up showing ace-9. This might look like, first it's a showdown, and you have to look at showdowns. I'm saying that in every single video I make, but you seriously need to look at every single showdown that occurs at your tables, whether you are involved in the hand or not, just in order to get as much info as possible and use it afterwards. Here, he bets the flop with ace-9 high, which I think is a pretty big mistake because I'm not check folding anything here that is better than ace-9 high, and if I'm folding, he was beating me anyways. It could be a good play if he decided that, okay, I'm gonna make him fold ace high, other ace highs, or nines through deuces. By betting twice or three times, but just betting once here is a pretty strong technical mistake that doesn't look like much, but that's gonna add up in the long run, certainly. Here against Inerp C, he's playing kind of tricky. I have a lot of history against this guy, and I don't want to bet and get check raised. I think he's the type of guy who could lead something like a set or a straight here and check raise that turn. So I'm just gonna check back, take the easy way. I'm never ever having two streets of value from anything anyway, so there's no point in betting that turn. And on the river, I mean, my stats aren't. I don't have enough hands on this computer to look at his stats closely enough to take my decision. I'm just gonna go with what I know of the guy instead of the stats, but this is kind of spot where you want to take a mix of, in order to take a good decision, you want to have a mix of stats plus what he thinks of you, what you think of him, etc., etc. Here, this would mostly be a call against a lot of opponents, but I think this guy is kind of scared of me. I mean, I've been playing a bit higher against him, and he just, in general, he doesn't like either bluffing me or he's kind of avoiding me, so I expect him to show up with a good hand after leading, and then I think if he checks turn, he's just going to give up most of the time up to the river from what I know from him. So I decided to fold that river that I could have called against anyone, against other players. Here, Mustang, you know, this is weird. I'm going to call the flop, just because he's not the type of guy to keep on going with his bluffs. I don't think he's going to pull me the sick raise min bet line with a bluff here, basically pretty much ever, but I don't even expect him to do that for value with many holdings. I just think he thinks I'm gonna spaz, and I mean, he's pretty much turning his hand over, and I think he's aware of that here. He's not that good of a player, but he's still a thinking player. I've played it quite a bit against him, and I think he knows that he's turning his hand over, and from what I have as an historic against him is that he probably has something like 8s, 9s, 10s, and wants me to spaz, but it's kind of too obvious for him to do it that way. I'm trying to calculate if I have the odds to call or not, because I don't think I ever have the best hand. I think this is really close. I might have the best hand, and if he has something like 8, 9, which isn't totally impossible, I'm gonna be able to win the hand most of the time because he's pretty passive river player. There's also the fact that if I have the best, if I hit the river, it might not be good enough because he might have 7x and just be trying to spaz me, but he did have exactly what it looked like he had, but I think he did give me the direct odds on the turn for me to call, but I'm not even sure against that. I didn't want to get involved in a big bluff here because I think he was trying to do that to make me spaz anyway. So kind of a tricky spot. I can't really fold the flop because there are going to be too many good opportunities for me to take down the pot on later streets, and on the turn I just call because it's giving me the odds, and I don't want to turn my hand into a bluff. And this read is built on hands and hands and thousands of hands. I have 1,200 hands on this guy, but it's only on my laptop. I've played much more on my desktop computer against this guy, and yeah, that's how I've come to the conclusion that he had exactly what he had, and that he was probably trying to make me spaz. And I came to that conclusion not because I saw him do that earlier, just because I kind of know how he thinks, basically how he approaches poker hands and how he views me and how he views himself, which are the things you want to consider when taking a decision. So yeah, where was I? I talked about the past, and I do want to find a couple more hands that I've played too earlier in the session. Oh no, I closed that table. So yeah, I'm gonna miss that hand. No big deal. I did not close that table. Some adjustments that I made against players because of stuff that I've seen them do, and oh no, the end is too old. I don't have it, or my computer is just frozen. Hello? Excellent, it's working. But my mouse is not working. Just give me a minute, I will be back. Sorry about that, my mouse is no longer working, unfortunately. So I will be playing with my touchpad, and it's pretty noisy, but I will try and have it make less noise, hopefully. That hand, the ace deuce, this is a horrible river. I will play back the hand for you later. but I think I have to call because my opponent is more likely to have. I think there are enough missed spades in his range. I don't have any info on the guy, so I need the info first, and I think in the normal, if he's playing kind of normally, he's going to have more missed spades than 6x, and he ended up value betting really, really thin, which with threes here, so knowing that he can value bet that, it obviously becomes basically a snap call for me. Ace 9, this is a close one. This is a kind of hand that I want to look at my opponent's stats, and he's 3-betting 5% from the blinds, so this is a no-brainer fold. I would probably start calling if my opponent is 3-betting over 10% of his small blinds, 10, 11%, that kind of area. My Ace 9 with these percentages becomes good enough for me to call, basically. Here it doesn't make any sense, that line from John Rumble, so I'm just gonna call and hope that he has a pair under jacks and nines that he's trying to turn into a bluff. I don't see any possible holdings for him. I think this is, I mean, the guy's a random guy, totally random, and I feel like he's gonna show up. He might show up with Jack X. I wouldn't mind. I just, once again, this is a spot where I need the information, and his line doesn't make any kind of sense to me. So he did have a bluff, just like I expected him to do with this line, which is a really poor bluff because it doesn't make any sense. And I don't know if he knows me, but I mean, your bluffs have to make more sense if you are playing against a competent player, which is kind of the theme of the hand that I ended up finding and that I want to show you. I'm playing here against a guy who was playing. He's gone, and he's gone from the tables, but he was playing something like 60-40, and pretty much randomly. I mean, he's just too loose. He's a fish, basically. Aggressive fish, but not post-flop aggressive. I mean, he looked like he was going to be aggressive when he has the initiative, but pretty passive without the initiative, which is a kind of read you obviously want to get on your opponents. So I decided that I wanted to play the hand because the guy is way too bad, obviously, playing too many hands and stuff. But I don't want to just call because there are way too many flops against an aggressive opponent with the initiative that I will just have to check fold. So I decided to treat that pretty small. Reason for that is that these kind of players don't tend to fold to 3-bet no matter how big I'm going to do it. So I expect him to call. So I don't want to build myself too big of a pot. I want to give myself more room, more options post-flop. I'm just trying to basically build an initiative. Kind of build a pot that I'm going to be able to steal later and play in his head a bit. So he calls as expected, and flop comes queen 10-6. A standard play here would be a standard c-bet, 40 into 60, which is, I think, what most of you guys would do here. But that would be a really good example, I think, of not taking into account every single piece of information that you have in the hand. With everything that I told you about the guy, I felt like he was the type of guy that, I mean, this kind of loose fish is not that he's not the type of guy to. He's going to be the type of guy who he's not going to call down too light. I mean, for his whole stack. But it feels to me that if I bet really small, it's going to raise every single really good hands that he has and call with a lot of holdings, a lot of gut shots, random gut shots, middle pair and down, etc., etc. Coming back on the bluff that I just called with my ace high on table 1. It's not a good bluff for me. In a vacuum, it's terrible. It doesn't make any sense. I end up betting 18 into 60. He calls pretty quick, and I decide to fire pretty big on the turn. And my plan was to just shove river and expect him to fold close to 100% of his holdings after I bet small enough that he's probably raising any queen X on the flop with that sizing. from what I've seen so far from him. So all the info that I've acquired in the about 100 hands that he played, that he was playing a lot, he was really active, so it was kind of easy for me to get those infos. This is weird, King Queen. I mean, I don't have any other options in call. I feel like he's gonna King Queen pretty often himself, maybe Jack Queen. Maybe Queen 10, but I mean, he's value betting worse, so I definitely have to call with top of my range, and he did end up having it. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense if I'm playing against a competent opponent. I mean, my line, the sizings, everything, I'm never valuing here. It's obvious to anyone, but this guy is not anyone. He's a bad player. Poor pass. So I don't need my bluffs to make sense against that type of player. This is a good example of an adjustment that I'm going to be doing. A bluff is basically a story that you tell your opponent, and you don't approach bluffing the same way from opponent to opponent, because there aren't two guys who are going to react the same to the same story, basically. And I don't feel like my story has to be coherent from beginning to the end for this guy to end up folding a pair or just end up folding the better hand here. This wouldn't be the case against a good thinking opponent, but I'm not going to take that line against a good thinking opponent. So this is the kind of adjustment you want to make. Another one that I make, kind of almost exactly the same, back when there was a fish sitting in red aces full. See, I'm getting there. Call, fold, raise. I'm getting there. I've played a lot. I hope I didn't skip it. Yay! Pretty much the same situation. I mean, it's not 3-bet pot, but it's the same principle. He calls and he was playing super loose, like 60% VPIP as well. Here, in C, this is a good hand / board for me to float on. So I'm just gonna look at his flop stats. His continuation betting 60 on the flop, on the turn 40. He's giving up quite a lot. I don't expect him to multi-barrel this queen eye board a lot. Pre-flop, he's raising 40 from late position, which I think include button and cutoff. So I think it's a perfect situation for me against the stats that this guy is showing, number of time he's giving up on the turn, etc. I think this is a good situation, a good board for me. Everything is kind of put into place for me to try and float the flop. Didn't work out. He bets the turn. That's pretty quick. I mean, there are a lot of draws on that turn. This is definitely not the best turn for me, but still, I don't feel like I'm going to be good enough. If I had the ace of clubs, I'd probably call twice in order to maybe try a big bluff if the club gets there, just because there aren't many combos of clubs left if I have the ace and the queen is on the board. But with only the 10, I feel like a floating once is good. Coming back on the play that I made earlier, I bet 8 into 30 on the flop on that board against the fish, because kind of like the other fish, he was the type of guy who, if he has top pair here, is going to just raise to see where he's at. So if I bet 8 and he just calls, he basically has Jack X or lower. So I'm just manipulating his whole range. My initial plan, if let's say the turn is a deuce of suit, is to overbet turn, overbet river, and expect to, or bet pot turn and overbet river and expect to receive 100% folds basically after betting 8 on the flop. Even though once again my line doesn't make any sense, my opponent is not aware of that, so I'm taking advantage of that. I ended up betting small again on the turn because I felt like that turn was kind of dangerous and was getting a lot of 2 pairs and or straights there with like ace 10. So I wanted to give him another chance of telling me that he has a strong hand if he does have one, and he ended up folding the turn. But if he calls again and the river is a blank, let's say a deuce of suit, I'm going to basically overbet and take down the pot every single time because, like I said, I expect that guy with my sizings to go ahead and raise pretty much every single two pairs plus that he's going to have. So worked out well for me. I took it down on the turn. Not risking too much. I'm risking very little on those bluffs. I'm risking little when I have little information, and the more the end is progressing, the more information I'm getting, the more I'm likely to risk big to win the pot, because I feel like the more information I have, the better assessment on his folding tendency I'm going to be able to make, basically. He raises his button. I'm gonna float ones here. He's raising a lot of buttons, and he's probably not multi-barreling much in that situation. I would usually just check and hope my ace-high is good, but against this guy, I want to make him fold. Out of his 5x that Mike got there on the river, he never ever has a flush. He's betting the turn 100%, I know that. And I want to make him fold some ace-jack that he might, ace-jack, ace-10, maybe ace-queen, that he might have made a mistake by betting the flop with, because I know this guy is the type of guy who is going to make such technical mistakes. This is a read that I have acquired, once again, from playing lots of hours against him. So I feel like betting that river against that specific opponent is better, but against most opponents who could read a bit better or could be a bit more balanced, who could turn over a flush, or who could turn over something like X here and kind of slow play a street, adjust to me because I'm playing so wild and so aggressively, I might just check and hope I am good. Because betting doesn't accomplish much, but here it does accomplish something by making him fold some hands that he might have bet the flop with, that he shouldn't have bet the flop with. So another good example of an adjustment, a detail that I know about the guy, some reads that I've acquired that helped me make the best play. When you tell a story, when you tell, let's say it's a bluff story, you want to, like I've showed you, you don't want to make your story coherent in a vacuum. You don't want to write the best story possible. You want to write the best story possible for your opponent, for your exact opponent. And you want to put as much attention as possible in knowing what your opponent is going to look at when you make a play, and adjust accordingly to that. When the video started, I didn't mention it, but I bluffed with ace-10 and I skipped it. Damnation. Against red aces. There, right there. Sorry about the clicking noises. I'm gonna try to remove that from the video, but my mouse ended up dying on me, so I'm really sorry. And this is a really good, really good example of a player who I think understood how to be aggressive, but is not considering enough details in order to show with good aggression. His aggression is going to work against less observant opponents, but against the better opponent, it's not going to work, and he's going to get schooled. Let's see why. I see bet 20 here. My range is super weak. I mean, I could have basically any two cards. I'm going to c-bet that. I raise a cutoff, and I'm c-betting that flop 100% of the time. I'm not gonna joke you guys. And he goes ahead and makes a raise to 50. But I've played against this guy, and I know this guy is not thinking far enough to go ahead and like raise king 10 here or king jack. He might have king queen, but I don't think he's ever raising for value here with a hand worse than king queen ever. So it leaves him with a lot of possible bluffs if he's doing that as a bluff. Now let's see what other details I want to look at in this hand. The exact board. The exact board is super important here because it's full of gut shots. And I feel like this player is the type of guy who is going to raise with a gut shot here because he doesn't want to float. He's like, okay, I don't have enough equity. I'm just going to raise my gut shot, hope he is full of shit, and take down the pot. Like I said, it's going to work against a lot of opponents, but it's a perfect example of someone making a play, making a technical play that they've read, that they've heard somewhere, but not paying attention to what they should be paying attention to. And this is who they are playing against. The example here is me, but any very good player would do the trick. What a nice turn. Just because I have a specific read on this guy, I'm going to go ahead and overbet turn and ship river for value, and I'm going to explain it later. I would do it as a bluff against pretty much everyone, but this guy I think is very likely to call me down with nothing the first time around. Not with nothing, he's not going to call me down with nothing, but call me down with, I don't know, 5, 6s, 7x, a lot of 7x, all these type of hands, because it's a great bluff spot for me, obviously. So I'm trying to maximize my value. But here, he's raising, but he's not putting himself in my shoes. I mean, he knows me. I know he knows me because we've played some together. And by raising, he doesn't realize that his range is way too on this board exactly, and that I can read this board. His range has way too more gut shots in it, basically. And I feel like if I just click it back, or so just rebluff over, he's gonna stop thinking at all. He's like, okay, I've tried my technical move, didn't work out. All I need to do now is to give up because I don't want to make a big mistake. So I click it back. If he was thinking a bit more on the dynamics, on who I am, on what my style of play is he could go ahead and click it back once again, and then we would have a really interesting hand because my own range is ridiculously weak in that situation when I click it back. I mean, I'm doing that as a bluff pretty much every single time, especially against him, but close to never doing it for value or with very, very, very few holdings on that board. But he ends up folding just like I expected him to do. I'm not going to play it that way against most players, but I feel like he was exactly the type of player who is kind of stuck at mid-stakes because he's doing those technical moves which are kind of okay, but he doesn't take into account enough information during the hand. And here the vital information, I think, was the fact that the board had so many gut shots in it, and that he's playing against me, and he has to be aware of the fact that by raising, he opens me the door for a possible re-raise over. So I just out information that guy in this end. I'm basically out thinking him because he's not taking the right thing into account. I'm gonna have to take a break. I'm gonna be back in a second. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, once again, my story is not that coherent, but it doesn't have to be because I know this guy stops thinking the moment I click him back. I mean, the hand is basically over in his head, and I know it because it's a pattern that comes back in a lot of players who just take one random stab at the pot and pretty much give up after. So you want to know these players, and you want to you want to know them pretty well and use them to your advantage, and use these reads of players who want to take small stabs at the pots, no matter what street it is, whatever. They just take one bullet and then give up. those are the most exploitable players you're ever gonna find, almost. And if I'm against a better player who is adjusting to all of that, I'm obviously going to play it kind of differently. Here, another example, I'm check calling with King Jack here on that board because this is a kind of paired board where I think this exact opponent is never ever going to fire a second bullet as a bluff in a paired board there, which is another thinking process that a lot of these weak players have. And another technical mistake is I think he's even c-betting most of his ace high there, but he's going to fold it when I bet the river, assuming that I will show up with a pair pretty much every single time, because that's what most people do, but they don't adjust to the player, they don't adjust to anything basically. They just c-bet because they c-bet and then give up because the board is paired. And the less details you take into account in these situations, the more you can get exploited. And check calling with King Jack off on this board is a really good example of how of an exploitation that I'm gonna make out of a pretty terrible player. Not terrible, but not excellent player. So yeah, you want to be aware of who you are against in a hand and build your story, build your bluff according to that, and it has to be your main factor, your main decisional factor has to be your opponent. If it's anything else, you're making a mistake. And by anything else, I'm talking about your hand, the board, etc. It has to start by who is my opponent, how is he going to react to the way I'm playing, the line I'm taking, the way I'm playing certain hands, etc. I'm going to join another table, sorry about that. What's up with that? Here I'm going to take a look at his pre-flop statistics, see how often he's cold calling from the blinds. Cold call is not what I hate Poker Tracker, God. I'm just going to give up, but I could call once or twice depending on the player, but I don't have any enough info, and I don't understand Poker Tracker as well as I understand all the manager, unfortunately. But what you want to be looking at, okay, let's say this turn, what kind of details I want to be looking at. Here, this flop, I obviously wanted to see how much he's check raising. He's check raising 10% on the flop. Second detail I want to take into account is how much has he check raised. He's check raised pretty big. The timing, he's check raised really quick. So I think big plus quick, plus the fact that he's not check raising that much, plus the board, I think he's going to show up with at least a good draw most of the time here. You would probably have to think at least a couple of seconds if he wants to bluff with absolute hair on this board. Air, not hair, obviously. I'm getting good. So I'm just gonna fold. If he takes some time and makes it smaller, it might be more likely that he would have a bluff here. But like I said, big and fast in that situation, from what I know of this player, I think this has to be a fold to me. But it obviously, as you saw, it depends on all those details, whether I'm gonna fold it. There's no written rule, there's no rule of thumb, okay, you have to fold queen 10 here or whatever. It has to depend on everything else. And coming back on the ace king, I mean, every hand depends on details. What kind of details? Okay, here, what I want to look at is how often, in statistical point of view, is he calling from the small blind, so what kind of hand range he has, and then how often he is likely to not only bet the turn, but how often is he likely to bet the river. is he going to be balanced when he bets the turn plus the river? Is he going to have close to as many bluffs versus as many values? If I call the turn, is it possible that he's going to make me make a mistake on the river because he's balanced enough? Or is he always betting the turn with nothing and then giving up the river? Or is he always betting turn plus river as a bluff and giving up if he has, I don't know, a small pocket, just checking the river? Those are all the things you want to consider, obviously. So I didn't have enough info. I don't know his tendencies from that particular spot, so I just ended up taking the safe route and folding, basically, which is not a mistake at all, and which is way better than betting the flop, which, unless you want a multi-barrel against someone who's never going to call 3 streets with 2 pairs or plus, it's going to be a mistake most of the time. Another hand that I played that I'm going to talk about all the details on why I decided to size that way against OMX, the king tree, and I turned trips and decided to size twice the pot. Okay, this one. This is a line that I like a lot on these type of boards. I bet the flop, see bet the flop. I could have checked back the flop as well, but I decided to see bet because I do have a backdoor and I do have, I think, some value on the flop against his ace-x, who are going to call once his good ace-x, so I can check back the turn and then reevaluate. So I turn trips and I go ahead and bet 84. This is a line that I love if I have nothing at all, especially when people don't know me. Very, very, very rarely will people ever call the turn plus the river on overbets with 1 pair. And this is a board where my opponent pretty much always has 1 pair or less. There are basically no possible 2 pairs or anything of that nature. So I wouldn't want to do it for value, obviously, because I'm making him fold most of his range. But no info on the guy. He's 3-betting super big, and there's that shortish stack here. I think it's an obvious fold for me with the... That was dumb to click on the replayer. I wanted to check what NRBC he had, but I want to come back on the king tree and as well. There it is. So yeah, I overbid the turn, and I would do it, like I said, as a bluff to a lot of players. And on a board where your opponent is check calling and pretty much never ever can have 2 pairs or plus, you want to go ahead and put a lot of pressure on him, because you want to put your pressure according not to your actual hand, but according to your opponent's end range, which is something that I decided to tell you that doesn't have that has link with that hand, but something really important. So if you missed that sentence, play it back. It's really, really important, and it's a guideline to play poker. But here, I'm getting there. I'm getting to why I overbet it for value. I took some notes earlier in that session that the first of all, he's from Mexico, and it's not even a joke. I mean, it sounds kind of racist, but it's not. I mean, some players from some countries have tendencies. I mean, countries have tendencies in general. Mexico have a tendency to be out of line and play out of the ordinary. Against 2 players here, this is close. I think, knowing, I'm going to come back on OMX just in a second. I think knowing Nicholas here, he's going to call me with a lot more holding than just 7x, and the fish definitely doesn't have 7x often. And I feel like even though one of the two guys have 7x from time to time, they're never calling the river with anything else, and I don't have to bet that big because it is 3-way, and they are going to give me more credit because it is 3-way. I mean, you can't call with because he's kind of sandwiched, and there was a flush draw on the turn, so it's likely that a lot of players will have the flush draw, but he ended up having deuces. I expected basically Nicholas to have the busted spades a lot, and this guy to have any kind of pair just because he's playing randomly. Nicholas ended up having deuces, but I really don't mind the bluff. I think the way he called really fast on the turn, it showed me that he probably didn't have 7x, and that part of my read was right. He just ended up having a straight as well that he was not folding anyways. So yeah, on OOMX, he's from Mexico, so he's likely to be more out of line than, let's say, Canadian or an American or a German player or something like that. He's likely to be doing stuff in order to own people. He wants to own people, yeah, pretty much it. Terrible card on table 1 to continue. I would have continued my bluff on a lot of turns. This is not one of those. And the very first time I 4-bet him at the very beginning of the session, he ended up 5-bet shoving me with king queen of suit from the small blind, which is a technical, and I mean, it's a big mistake. I mean, just 3-betting the king queen of suit from the small blind is going to be a mistake against pretty much anyone. And then shoving with king queen is not good. It's just not good because it's in terrible shape against my entire 4-bet calling range, basically. So what this showed me, it was only a hand, but I decided that I could take a lot of info out of that hand. That this guy, given that he 5-bet shoved me as a kind of bluff on the very first hand, that I 4-bet him, I think he's going to have a huge ego. He's not gonna let himself get beat up, get bluffed, or whatever. He's gonna be a hero in general. I think he's going to want to make the big call down, the big bluff, all these kinds of things. And this read is not only useful for me in the 4-bet, 5-bet situations, similar to the one I encountered. This is not a good river for obvious reasons, but yeah, the 4-bet, 5-bet situations that I'm going to encounter against him, I think is going to be applicable to a lot of big pots, big rivers pots that he might end up calling me lighter than most people. Especially, I think he actually talked to me. Oh, this is, yeah, well, whatever. Well, this sucks. So yeah, basically that's pretty much what I wanted to say about this guy, that he's likely to be a hero just from what I've seen from him. And it's a simple thing, but it allows me to make a lot of assumptions on how he's gonna play, and the more you play, the more you try to make these assumptions, the more you try to make these reads on your opponents, on their thinking patterns, the more you're gonna get good at it. This, I don't know. I feel like this is a fold because if he doesn't have a heart, he has a pair, and he's not betting any pair on the river ever, and he could have full house. So I feel like this is a fold, even if the guy's playing pretty randomly. I would usually call, but this guy just doesn't have bluffs here, I think. And what that will allow me to make that, to take that note on the king queen and to get this read early in the session, assuming that I am right, and you will be wrong from time to time, don't get me wrong. I mean, I sometimes make these assumptions and I try to get reads in different spots just by deducting what he did in certain spots and whatever, and I'm going to be wrong, but believe me, it's way better than trying nothing at all, than just staying in your normal game plan and not adjusting it to your opponent. What it allows me to do to take that note is to start making a lot of misdirection. I'm gonna be playing with my image because I'll keep playing as loose as I'm usually, and I can start over my sentences. I will keep playing as loose as I usually do against pretty much everyone else at the table, but I will tighten up a lot against a guy who is likely to calm me down the most. But at these stakes, one of the leaks of these guys is that they are not going to adjust to what I am doing specifically versus them. They're going to mostly adjust to my general stats, general infos, but they're not keeping in mind the whole historic, the whole specific historic that is against each other. So I feel like he's going to make mistakes. Because he's gonna think in the end, just because I make this small adjustment in the beginning, he's gonna think that I'm playing much looser than I actually am against him in particular. So you want to throw in a lot of, as soon as you get some info on the psychological profile of your opponent and how he's likely to react in the big situations, in the big spots, and then once you get a good grasp on what his technical mistakes are, what he's taking into account, what are the factors that he's considering when he's trying to tell a story, and what are the factors that he's not considering. Once you have a good grasp on all of that, like I said, you can make a lot of misdirection. You can make him think that you're bluffing a lot, but in reality you're just value betting a lot. And then when he adjusts, you try to stay a step ahead of him, so you start bluffing a lot and stop value betting and whatever. You want your game, you want your overall game to stay active and stay dynamic, and you want to keep adjusting to everyone at the table. Never settle for, okay, that's the way I play middle pair. I check call once and then give up. It has to be specific to always everyone at the table, everyone involved in every situation. Here I'm gonna lead 20. I think both players will just, on that board, 3-way. It's a bet less than half the pot, and I think both of them will fold pretty much every single time they have nothing at all. And if one of them call, I mean, I'm putting 20 into 45 on the flop, so I don't need it doesn't need to work that much on the flop to be profitable. And there are a lot of turns plus rivers, especially with a backdoor and 2 overs, that will allow me to take down the pot at some point in the hand. So this is a good turn for me, I think. Obviously, keep on barreling, take it down. Another good example of how I paid attention to all the details. Okay, instead of just, oh, I missed the board, I'm gonna check. Here I'm against 250 big blinds players, not likely to be thinking that much, probably playing fit or fold, even though I don't know much about these guys, except that John Rumble has tried a big bluff earlier, but he's sandwiched in this hand, so he can't do anything on the flop, and the other guy is most likely playing fit or fold because he just looks like fish. It allows me to make that lead and then fire a second barrel and be profitable with it. So the more info you get, the more you can read your situations, and the more you can be aggressive in the right spots, and not just aggressive in random spots, and aggressive in the right spots against the right players. Adjusting to all of that, it's a skill that takes time to build. You're going to be making mistakes, a lot of mistakes, and it's, yeah, I don't want to bluff, it's too random, yeah. Like I said, you're going to be making a lot of mistakes, and this is pretty obvious, but you're going to get better the more you force yourself into trying to pick up tails, trying to pick up timing patterns, betting patterns into your opponents. A lot of opponents have mistakes. Another betting pattern that is very common that I'm showing for you guys is that a lot of players value bet their hands according to the strength of their own hands instead of doing it according to the strength of their opponent's range, which is the right way to do it. So a lot of players are giving a lot of tells with their bet sizing, which is another important information. I didn't get the chance in this video to put that one into example, but if you have any hand that come to mind that you might have got some tells out of the bet sizing of your opponent, shoot them or whatever, we'll discuss them. Yeah, I think I've said pretty much everything that I wanted to say, and I'm gonna leave you by making you realize that the best players are the most complete players in the terms of a good technical game and a good adjustments game and reads game. Every single mid slash high stakes players is regularly making technical mistakes, like betting ace high on a flop that they don't need to, like just c-betting for the sake of c-betting, not being balanced from every position in the statistics pre-flop. For some reason, some players will raise more cutoffs than they raise buttons and raise more hijacks than they raise cutoffs, or they will 3-bet more from the big blind than they do from the small blind, which are all logical, technical mistakes that you don't want in your game. And all these mistakes, when they are isolated, they don't seem like much, but they always add up. Every single mistake, every time you do something that is not optimal, it adds up, and it's all these things that differentiate the bad from the good player. And then to get great, you have to adjust all of that to your specific opponents, and you have to get better at acquiring information from your opponent. And I'm gonna leave you guys with that wonderful 2 pairs and a trips board, and I hope my opponent doesn't have a 10. It would suck balls, and it sucked balls. So discover your opponent's leaks and expose them, and try to have as little leaks as possible in your own game. This was Martin Fournier-Giguère saying you start playing better, you fucking moron.